and peaceful relations between states, and getting us to Oz.
Terrific. Well, thank you all very, very much. You've given us, we kind of bookended it with the broader view, excuse me, broader view, and then a couple of cases in depth and some additional ones sprinkled throughout. So we really have a lot of different ways that we can go with this discussion. As I mentioned, as we go forward with questions, my colleagues will bring a microphone to you. We ask you let us know who you are and use the mic so we can all hear you, and so the video captures that. So who would like to kick us off in terms of questions? We have a gentleman all the way in the back, and then we'll come down here and over here.
Yes, my name is Joel Edgar, and my question is, what has been the impact of the bushmeat crisis on biodiversity?
Okay, why don't we capture a couple of them and then give you guys an opportunity to pick the gentleman right there in the, yeah.
Hi, Alex Dagan. I just came back from a year and a half as head of WCS Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we're trying to set up a peace park between Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and Tajikistan. It's actually been incredibly successful. We brought the 4 countries together. 3 of the countries are very interested in the word peace, and ostensibly, much of what we're trying to do is a peace park. China is not, and they have indicated that they really won't participate if the word peace is used. So we've switched to the use of transboundary peace park. I think this is an example of where it's not the NGO, the countries, one of the countries that has decided not to use peace. How would you recommend sort of dealing with that? Because ostensibly, it is in part conservation, but it also is in part to encourage cooperation between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which have, due to the Darrell Line borders in disputes, Pakistan and China have borders in disputes.
That's a great question, Alex. And then maybe Saleem, to add on that, use your experience with the Seychelles Glacier and some of those same players and reticence there as well to do that. The gentleman straight across in blue, if you can pass it across there, Sean.
Thanks, Jeff. Errol de Montiel, Peace Parks Foundation, South Africa. I think Saleem raised a rather interesting question in my mind in terms of an international treaty. And I'd like, and I know Dorothy went into the part of the marine peace parks. I think that's kind of, I don't particularly want to go down that line when talking about an international treaty. I think it's a landmine in itself. But could Saleem just perhaps expand some of these thoughts on an international treaty? What would be the purpose of this treaty? Who would participate? Would it be the IC countries, restricted to the IC countries or the warm countries? How would that work? And would this fall under the UN or what auspices?
Why don't we take those 3 and perhaps Saleem, you can kick us off, and others can follow up.
The first question about bushmeat, I'll defer to my colleagues who have more experience in Africa. But with regard to China and Central Asian peace park efforts, I found that in some cases the use of the term has a lot to do with language and translation, and I've encountered the same reluctance with China with the Siachen dispute. And but if you actually talk to the Chinese in more detail, what they have in mind is on the same wavelength. It's more a semantic issue. If that's the case, I don't have any problem saying, okay, that's fine. But if it is done in a way that, okay, we don't want to link this to any of the other political issues and so on, then I would be a little bit more cautious, because you don't want the conservation agenda to be co-opted in a certain way. And what I found then, like for example with the Siachen cases, we said, okay, we've got India, Pakistan and China, very close proximity in terms of disputed territory. Pakistan and China have had relatively good relations, and there are existing conservation areas on both sides there. India doesn't have a conservation area. India and China have had their own border disputes. So the sequencing then becomes very interesting. And this is where we get into process issues of the negotiation itself. And what was suggested to us there was, okay, Pakistan and China, let's move forward on that dynamic first, and then bring in India. And that may potentially be the way to go. So yes, the sequencing then would be very important. I know that George Schaller has been working on the Pamir Peace Park effort, and there too we've got potentially similar problem rising. And so yes, I think it's an important issue. We have to differentiate the semantic part from the actual substantive part. With regard to the international treaty, what I have in mind are two issues with the treaty. One is the role of the environment in times of conflict, and how we deal with conservation areas when there is conflict going on. For that, right now, within the international legal framework, there are some addendums to the Geneva Convention that kind of touch upon those issues, but could potentially expand it. There's a proposal for a 5th Geneva Convention on, specifically on environmental harms during times of conflict. So that could be one avenue to take as an entry point, and then to expand it and say, okay, border areas which have environmental sensitivity, and it could be in a way similar to the World Heritage Convention, where you actually you delineate those areas and establish a list and so on, and saying, okay, these are the areas which would be falling under that rubric, and those countries who are parties to the convention, if they ever get into a conflict of some kind, or that this region is sacrosanct in some form, so that it wouldn't be disturbed during conflict, a border conflict of some kind. So there can be a proactive part to the treaty of that kind. I think it's more likely to be effective if you link it to the larger issue of how countries interact with each other in times of armed conflict and the environment. So that's how the law of the sea is a treaty, of course, too. It's an international treaty. So actually, the Marine Convention, the Marine Peace Park idea would fall very nicely into the law of the sea convention as an additional protocol, perhaps, within the law of the sea convention. And I think there is, in terms of how it would be managed, the law of the sea convention has very specific subcategories. Like on mineral issues, they have a separate secretariat in Jamaica which deals with issues related to minerals. Similarly, there could be an arrangement made regarding conservation areas. So there is enough flexibility in that. I'm really heartened to hear Dorothy's observations about what is being done in the marine front, because I think that's an area which deserves immediate attention. So I think those were the three. So the bushmeat question, maybe.
Thank you, Saleem. May I ask to make clear the question, because I couldn't get.
Sure. Well, I think if I understood it, the kind of what perhaps both the what we might expand it to say in terms of these kind of transboundary conservation areas, what kind of impact, if any, are you seeing out of the bushmeat trade, and is there the prospect for it helping us address this problem?
Thank you. In our experience, we don't think that the bushmeat can have a negative impact on the biodiversity, because as I mentioned in my presentation, the involvement of the population requires that they have tangible benefit from what we are doing in the park. So among the activities that enhance the park, I mentioned the sport hunting. Through the sport hunting, they can have meat, they can benefit of the meat, because those who come for the sport hunting just go to hunt, and their pleasure is to kill the animal. After killing the animal, they give the meat to the local population. More, in addition to that, we in our project that we are promoting now, we promote also the game ranching. That can reduce all the pressure in the park. So I don't think that in our experience the bushmeat have a negative impact on the biodiversity. Because before the sport hunting, there is a plan that is established on the basis of the inventory of the animals in the park. So this plan shows how many animals can be killed, and I don't think that it has a negative impact. In contrary, that make a local population to be more involved in our activities. I don't know if I'm clear. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting issue. Certainly, I'd say one of the top three most challenging issues I've faced managing CI's office in Liberia. The bushmeat impact there is devastating. It's a real problem. I'll defer to some of my CI colleagues who may have more up-to-date information on the actual data, but as many of you I think can understand, it's a hard issue to gauge what the exact impact is. But I think the interesting connection to this discussion here is that, at least in Liberia, in places that may not have such strong rural law enforcement, the impact of bushmeat is certainly a function of the strength of park services and their ability to enforce the rule of law in these rural areas, but also the opportunity to provide alternatives. And as the Minister alluded to, I think one of the challenges is to balance the benefits that many of these communities depend on from bushmeat with the preservation of those resources. Another interesting issue that we faced in Liberia is that we had hunters from Cote d'Ivoire and from Sierra Leone coming into Liberia and actually getting in gunfights with Liberian hunters across the border, which didn't help with the peace building between the countries, as you can imagine. So you get all sorts of interesting issues related to bushmeat. But it's a very hard issue, and it's a hard question to answer as well.
I would like to jump in on Alex's question. I definitely agree with the distinction between whether it's semantic or substantive. And I don't know the situation. I obviously don't know where China is coming from on this. But in some cases where peace parks are actually going to offer us an opportunity for a creative third alternative for conflicted boundaries, where the location of the boundary is what's at issue. There's a chapter in the book that talks at length about Antarctica as an example. And we may actually get to the point that peace parks might offer a third way, an agreement to disagree, to not resolve a boundary, but to say, okay, we're going to just go in and use this area together for a third purpose, and we're going to lay all of our territorial claims aside. We're not going to let go of them. In Antarctica, the claimant countries still claim their areas, but the treaty members just agreed to put all those claims aside and work together. And we may get to the point with peace parks that might be a possibility. And I don't know if your situation with China is comparable there, but it may be that the use of the word peace makes them feel too much like they're giving up their claims. And so we need to have a language that will permit us to go past what we're trying to say and say, okay, we're just agreeing to disagree on this. And we can't overemphasize the importance of saving face. And that these countries with historical boundary disputes, it becomes a point of pride over generations and generations. And it's very important so nobody has to back down and look like they've given up anything. And we're just going to move ahead and do something different.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up on that? Dorothy, is that fair to say that was a dynamic that was at play with Peru and Ecuador in terms of having that be part of the peace agreement? So the kind of lessening the importance of precisely where the borders are that are in dispute?
I think it is I think that one actually
But
does.
they went a little further.
They did.
Yeah, they actually made the resolution of the dispute part of it. But I think the Antarctic example is excellent in this regard, because even in the Siachen case, we have proposed that also. And the army feels much more comfortable. Actually, Syria, with the Golan Heights, the proposal for a peace park there also takes that into account. That sovereignty would not even be something that we're questioning one side or the other. But that's an area which has environmental importance and cultural importance. Majority of the population is Druze, 65% of the population, which are a very distinct religious ethnic group. And Muhammad may have some thoughts on that also. But that's something which can be managed also as a transitional process.
Got a question right there, and then we'll come across. Around the table.
Hi, my name is Nav Dayanand. I'm the Washington office of the Wildlife Conservation Society. I just wanted to offer a little bit of clarification on this the transboundary park plans for Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and Tajikistan. The reason why China is reluctant to join this plan, and Alex will definitely confirm that, is because China dislikes the word peace. They say that they're not at war, so why use the word peace? And that's their whole reluctance with that.
Okay. If you could pass it to the gentleman just right, Christos, and then right next to him, and then we'll come to the other side of the table.
Yes, I'm Christos Kiro. I'm professor at American University at the International Peace and Conflict Resolution Program. And the last 4 years, actually, I'm very glad to see you again, Saleem. Ali, we met several years ago in the first workshop on environmental peacemaking in Maryland. And I'm glad to see that this is going on. From our perspective, we are a peace studies program, and we're utilizing mostly the analytical and theoretical frameworks from the peace perspective. And everything that happens with peace parks and environmental peacemaking is seen to us as supporting the actual process of peace. And I'm very glad to see certain keywords that for a long time have not been heard in the discourse of environmental, peacemaking, peace parks, such as place, for example, or relationship. Peace as a relationship, not as a dead end, you see. So I think we're going towards a very important direction, and your contribution, and also Woodrow Wilson with this scholarly powerhouse, I really appreciate what you've done, keeping this going. The question that I have, I'm sorry for the long introduction, is how do you approach the multi-layer effect of an intervention such as a peace park in a region, considering the conflict? We have some great analysis on the Liberian situation, but a lot of details, for example, the emerging unemployment out of decommissioning being handled with more rangers absorbed into handling peace parks, or using peace parks as ecotourism in response to the need for development, sustainable development. Or research and education, in the absence of, in a post-conflict reconstruction situation. How do you deal with all these multi-layer contributions of such interventions? Examining the synergistic potential there, of one with the other. I would like to hear more about this.
Christos, if you pass it to the gentleman right there next to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I apologize for I'm a refugee. I have no education and no speak very well English. My name is Fagir Shawish Taha from far north of Sudan. I am a member of the Rescue Nubia. We have a problem in our area because the government working to build 3 dams in the Nubia and by supporting with China and Egypt. And this is a land of civilization, and we have a conference in London last week, and all the scientific and teacher of the history, and like William Adams and Charles Bonnet and others, they said that the city of Karma is the fairest city in the world. And we have many holy places and very historical and history in the far north of Sudan. And this government, they don't care. They said this is belongs to the Kafir time. is against Islam. And there is very, very dangerous situation in the Nobi area. And there is very historical and very rich history area. We need your support. And also Egypt occupy our area now, our Nubian land, and also they want to control the Red Sea, the border of Sudan. So thank you very much. I need your support.
Thank you. Sean, I think we had a couple more on your side, other side of the table here, and make our way down.
Alon Weinstein, President of International Sustainable Systems, a sustainable development environmental management planning firm. And I had two comments. The first, they're both in Saleem's presentation. The first, I listened to his observation that of the 227 trans-border protected areas, that very few of them can actually be classified as peace parks. And he said this is largely because they don't contribute to peacemaking. And my own observation is that particularly for those of us who are on the outside looking into places as donors, as planners, as consultants, whatever it is, that we have a tendency to view these conflicted areas in terms of deficits. We do gap analysis, we do needs analysis, and so on, but we very rarely approach these kinds of places in terms of the assets that are inherent in an environment. And peace parks and I think Jeffrey, in your own book, in the environmental peacemaking book, I think touch precisely on some of the sets of principles that result in a pretty significant transformation in the way that we think about these environments, not in terms of what they lack, but in terms of what assets, and often rich sets of assets, are available for us, particularly in peacemaking and in conflict resolution. The second is comment, I guess, is a request for observation. And in those instances in which Saleem, conservation agencies and the security decision apparatus are not so divided. And two examples that come immediately to mind are Kenya and Botswana, two instances in which the security institutions and conservation have come crashing together for a whole number of reasons. But I'm wondering if the panel could comment on their experiences as they have them, as they relate to those instances, perhaps there are more, I hope that there are more, in which the conservation agencies and the security apparatus, in fact, have been driven together, and how successful that has been, or whether, in fact, it's been successful at all.
I think, why don't we take, there's one hand that's close, okay, we got in the back, and then Keith.
Thank you. My name is Finn Longinotto. I'm with Global Green USA, or Green Cross International, and I'm glad my question is following on the last one, because we, or Green Cross France, has some funding for a pre-feasibility study of a peace park between Jordan and Israel. This is the Rothenburg Abdullah Peace Park, which is truly a peace park in the sense that peace, we think, is going to be the vision here. Then there are other aspects of biblical Jordan Basin. There are archaeological things about old Ottoman and Roman bridges, many aspects. The conservation aspect, which is, I think, driving a lot of this, is hugely important, but almost secondary there. There are 500 million birds which migrate through this area, through this valley, twice a year from Russia down to Africa. So, curiously, this is almost incidental. So I'm just interested in the panel's view on how one should approach. We can't do everything in a pre-feasibility study. These very political aspects, very strong environmental arguments, and the stakeholder involvement from the beginning to try and bring the thing together.
Why don't we take that basket, and then we have a couple more on this side.
Okay, I'll first give it a shot with some of these. With regard to the use of rangers and linking peace parks with livelihoods, absolutely, that is, we're talking about the micro-conflicts. Addressing livelihoods is essential for that. The use of rangers, we have proposed in many cases that you don't want to necessarily demilitarize the area. Maybe in the case of Liberia, you do need to because of paramilitary elements. But if you have a very organized military force, they can certainly act as rangers. I mean, certainly in the Pakistan case, the Pakistani army is trained in that fashion in many cases. And I've talked to some of the army officers, and they say, yeah, we're all environmentalists. You know, first thing they say is, and then yes, we would. That seems plausible to us, and that would maintain a certain security buffer. and the same on the Indian side also I've encountered. So yes, that's certainly workable. Our friend from Sudan, this particular proposal, I will certainly try to pursue it to see to how to move it forward. I was not aware of this particular issue being active in the conservation sense. I think the Nubian case would be very important in terms of the World Heritage connection with that area, because it's such an important historical site. And the World Heritage Convention has no teeth, has been more used for tourism purposes, really, more than anything else. But there is a potential. If there was that level of critical mass, moving beyond the realists and saying low to high politics, this would be a classic case, because it has the World Heritage aspect in terms of history, but then maybe there might be some environmental elements to it also, which would be just as important, certainly in the coastal areas. So I would look forward to working with you on that. The question about conservation, security, Botswana, and those successful cases, yes, there are some, but what I'm talking about is not just at the specific project level, which I think you may be referring to as a planner, but I'm talking much more at the institutional level, where we're talking about if there's a decision being made as part of the usual process, environmental issues are on that checklist within the National Security Council or whatever it may be. And that part is lacking institutionally in most places. It's beginning to come out, and of course, Scandinavians are always leading the way. But the Swedes have started to do that institutionally, to just change the decision-making system. So that's what we're trying to get at. The Jordanian case I am very familiar with. In fact, as I was saying, I was in Lebanon last week, but the water minister from Jordan was there, and I mentioned the Peace Park effort in which Green Cross has been working on with Friends of the Earth. I have tremendous respect for Green Cross. I was a speaker at the Earth Dialogues in Brisbane a couple of years ago. But what I discovered just now with this one is, immediately the Jordanian water ministry said, this is not an official Jordanian effort. And I want to make sure all the delegates here know, this is not an official Jordanian effort. And I said, okay, wait, calm down, it's all right. We're not, all we're talking about is the mayors on both sides, they had an agreement, it was done at the local government level. But I think one strategic error maybe that Friends of the Earth made when they started doing this is they could have perhaps got the king to officially say something much more concrete. And he said to me, I said, look, the king put his name on it. It's no, he said, this is not the king's name, Friends of the Earth just put it on it. We need an official royal decree which says that this is the case. And I wouldn't be surprised if the king would be willing to do it. I mean, Queen Noor is on the board of Conservation International, and for all we know, they would happily do that. But I think maybe we need to operationalize things in a certain way so that we don't get into these kind of situations with them. So, but I'll leave the rest with my colleagues.
On that last one thing, one of the slides I threw out was that sometimes peace parks may not be about conservation at all. We may have cultural protected areas, but they may not always even be environmental. Sometimes it will just be distribution of resources. And I think we need to as we frame the issue, we need to be able to think that leave room for peace parks that cover other areas as well. In the Israel-Jordan case, you probably want to play all the cards you have, and I mean all of the benefits would be included in analysis, but let's leave it broad.
There was a hand, it's difficult with this table to see, and then right to Keith and then Jim.
Yes, I believe there are certain complexities associated with working with populations who aren't settled around these transboundary areas, and so I'd be interested to hear the minister talk a little bit more about how you worked with the transhumance pastoralists who use Park W on a seasonal basis, especially those that are coming down from Niger, and how you incorporated them into the process.
Okay. And if you could remind us who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kristen Patterson with the Nature Conservancy.
Terrific, thank you. If you could just pass it to Keith then.
Keith Brown with the Jane Goodall Institute. Madam Minister, you mentioned the subject of sustainability, and I think that's a very important issue that you raised. And what I would like for you to do is to sort of expand on that issue and talk about what problems you foresee for W in the future if funding is not forthcoming. And I'd like for the other panelists to talk a bit about what the critical elements are to ensure sustainability of these peace parks or transboundary areas. What are the conditions that are necessary to ensure sustainability? Thank you.
My name is Mohammed Saleem. I have a very pointed question. You use the phrase eco-regional identity in the conclusion. If you could elaborate on
Okay. Is there another one back there, Sean? Yeah, thanks for...
disappeared.
Okay. Why don't we take those if we could, Madam Minister, you have a couple questions?
Thank you very much. While talking about the consumers, we should understand it at two levels, at national level and transboundary level. At national level, I think that we are succeeding in finding solution for consumers because we are establishing grazing path and the conflicts are being resolved in this sense. But the transboundary consumers remain difficult to resolve because a lot of conventions have been signed between the three bordering countries, but the application is still non-effective. Maybe this section will talk about it. Hundreds of Fulani are relocating every year from Niger to Benin. A lot of conventions have been signed between the three countries, but nothing is effective at this level. Difficult. But Benin is the country who every year receive the livestock from the other country because we have more resources than them, but it's still a great problem.
Thank you. We have a very nice situation in between Benin, Niger, and Burkina Faso, because before this agreement to share a common resource, which is the W National Park, the park staff in Niger, for example, when they receive the transhumant coming from the Sahel, they just give them a pass, knowing that this pass allow them to go in the national park in Benin. But since 5 years, when they start this common management, I was well informed that the Niger board now no more gives some this kind of pass, but they advise the transhumant that it is a very big challenge for them if they have to pass the border and go in the Benin park. So it is better for them to look for the grazing area in the grazing in the Niger park, and if they have to go to Benin to follow the rule that are set in the place. There are some areas that can receive this transhumant, but it is not a sustainable solution as far as even the headmen in Benin don't have enough resources in the dry season, where bushfire burn all the dry grasses on the ground. So for me, the best way is to help transhumant to each government to see how far we can exchange cattle as we are in the common market for ECOWAS. It is very hard to share problem, very hard, because for the transhumant in the past, W National Park is the best area in dry season when they can find forage, tree forage mainly, and also some grazing area in the wetland of this park. But more and more, as it is an ecological restoration issue way, it becomes very hard for them. Talking about sustainability after the project, I agree that activity based on project is very hard. That's why it is very important for park manager to find their own way of saving some resource. In Benin, it is the case of sport game. They save some resource in order to meet the functional administrative cost. If not, it will be very hard to base a protected area on projects, and also only on foreign help. I don't think that that is the best way what I can.
Thank you, Bruce. I just want to add, what makes the transhumance harder is that the Fulani has their relatives in Benin as well as in Niger, as well as in Burkina Faso. So it is difficult to apply the applications of any rules. They don't help us, the transhumans, because their relatives are everywhere. Regarding the conditions of sustainability, I think two conditions are necessary to sustain the intervention in the park management. We have the technical adoption of intervention and the financial adoption also. About the technical adoption, we don't have a lot of problems. Local people are willing to collaborate, and they are benefiting of the economic valorization of the park. But about the financial aspects, something is evident that we cannot wait for donors at any time to come and support us. That's why we are thinking about what we call a fonds fiduciaire in French, trust fund. And some donors are ready to help us. That trust fund can enable the parks to be kind of financial autonomy, but is still in the process of consolidation. It's a great problem when they fund the project for 5 years. By the time you are seeking for new funds, all the achievements are in the process of distribution. It's very hard for us. Thank you.
And this actually transitions nicely into your question about the eco-regional identity, Mohammed, because the Fulani or other groups of that kind have an eco-regional identity. For them, the geographic borders, in terms of national borders, don't make much sense, but because their identity is related to the ecosystem. So that is what ultimately one would hope is people would have, like the Carpathian Convention, which is another very interesting case. I would think that it would be nice if Ukrainians and Poles and others said, we're Carpathians too, that would be an eco-regional identity. And we're moving towards that. We'd be surprised how much more and more people are identifying by a place, more so, even in terms of urban areas. There's another very interesting peace park proposal in an urban context, which has been, we've got a PhD student at Harvard who's working on it right now. In Nicosia, Cyprus, where the city is divided up in terms of the Turkish and the Greek part. But the identity there is much more as in terms of Nicosians. There it's a cultural identity. But the same kind of dynamic I would see in terms of ecosystems as well. So.
Could you see that working in an intractable conflict area like Israel, Palestine, Lebanon?
Not in the short term, for sure. I mean, I would be naive to say in the short term. But in the long term, like with the Golan, definitely I could see that. With the Druze, I mean, they really associate with the Golan as an ecosystem. In some ways, they've been more upset with Israel now because of the restrictions and all that have been placed on them, and there have been a lot of protests in the last 2 weeks. But in the larger scheme of things, I mean, they've been given Syrian identity cards also, But what matters to them is the place where they live in terms of their, the kinds of fruits they grow and so on and so forth. So that's what we're getting at, really, eco-regional.
Terrific. Well, I think we've come to the end of the appointed hour, and as I mentioned, we're going to try to set up the short video for you all to watch. Saleem, you and your colleagues and contributors, I think, have done us a great service. This is, at least my reading, the first academic press book, peer-reviewed book on peace parks, and there's an awful lot in it, so I would urge you all to pick up a copy outside and really dive into it. We've gotten a taste of multiple sets of issues and questions in terms of scale and in terms of resource types and in terms of how peace with a big P or peace with a little p or whatever, a conflict with a big C or conflict with a little c. Lots of different factors and variables in mind, and I think this book will really help us navigate some of these issues and push the agenda forward both in a scholarly, analytical fashion as well as a practitioner and a policymaker's fashion. I think today's discussion reflected progress on both of those worlds. I will urge you all to come to the Wilson Center site to find the PowerPoint slides, the video, and summary of today's session and links to the book and such in future, and share that with your colleagues. But won't you all join me in thanking them, and then again I urge you, we'll get this set up in just a few minutes, start the video so that you can see the images from the W International Peace Park as well.
I also wanted to just mention that in terms of the book sale, any royalties which may come from this, with academic presses it's seldom, but with a paperback it's possible, and the sales have been going very well. They will be donated to conservation causes, so there's no question about it. I mean, this book is not for making money by a long shot. So it's really to analyze, but to also move forward.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.